At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd, because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried him. Then they went and told Jesus.
In one sense, when you hear a story like this one, you'd be excused for thinking it was more Game of Thrones than Matthew's Gospel. In other ways, it's a reminder that the world Jesus inhabited was a brutal, violent one. And if we're honest, texts like this one they're not particularly ones that we like to dwell on. At the heart of what Matthew shares here is the story of a ruler in a sinful relationship. It's no coincidence that this is the absolute opposite of one of the themes he's reminded us of again and again: righteousness, being right with God and being right with one another. There's not much of that when it comes to Herod the ruler. But what we're really focused on is not Herod the ruler. It's John the Baptist. Friend, relative, counterpart of Jesus. Step back for a moment and we see a bigger picture here. A reality that it's not easy to get your head around. A reality of there being those who came before and after Jesus who lost their lives because they spoke God's truth. There are the apostles, the ones who Jesus paved the way for. And there's John the Baptist, the one who paved the way for Jesus. Both died as a result of persecution for the message they brought, that there was a better way to live in worship of the God of the Jewish people, aligned to the teachings of a man called Jesus. A man whose reputation and following struck fear into the corridors of power and spelt a nasty end for those who were associated with him. When you think about it, it's strange that Matthew chooses to include this. Surely it would have been easier just to miss this bit out. After all, it's hardly the best way to sell a movement, is it? Speak the truth of Jesus and, well, it might not end well. After all, alongside the stoning of Stephen, what happens to John the Baptist is one of the clearest demonstrations of what happens when you speak the name of Jesus. It can get you into trouble. People get scared. In this case, Herod. Why? Because they don't like the challenge it brings. Because they can't control the way that it penetrates their heart. Because it's got power that attracts people to follow it. And so they do everything they can to shut it down. So should we be surprised? Not really. After all, it's hardly the first time that Matthew has warned us. Remember these words from chapter 10? "I am sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you at that time. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Sibling will betray sibling to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. These are not easy words to take on board. The example of John the Baptist is not an easy example to follow. So what do we do with it all? Well, as a pastor or simply someone who thinks Jesus' teaching is worth listening to and living by with all we've got, I've often wondered what I would or I wouldn't stand up against. Would I always have the courage to speak God's truth, whatever the cost? Recently, I was invited to take part in a radio interview about asylum seekers that were going to be brought into our town, into Newport Pagnell. The local council was involved, along with the local MP and the town's mayor, and they invited me, as they put it, to bring some balance to the conversation. I can't lie. All I wanted to do was ask the people of our community to show the love they'd hope for if the boot was on the other foot. Of course it was clear that the government should pull its weight as well. But the Jesus truth is that we all have a part to play. Those were not easy words to speak, and I'm not sure I got it all right. However, the older I've become, the more I not only reflect on speaking God's truth being worth it, but on that being the very cost of following Jesus. Because if I don't speak God's truth and love and justice into these situations, if I compromise on that, what else will I compromise on? This passage about the death of John the Baptist comes as we enter a mini-series about good news. Good news that we're supposed to be sharing. Now, the gruesome death of a prophet hardly seems the best way to set that up. But I'm reminded that Jesus never ducked the fact that this is good news that comes at a cost. I'm also reminded that if those first apostles hadn't been prepared to give their lives for it, I may not be here doing this now. Makes you think, doesn't it? In 2,000 years' time, will people look back and be grateful that we were prepared to speak the good news of Jesus, whatever the cost?